Hey there, this is AJ and welcome to another podcasty episode. When you know a system, you can change it without breaking it. So what are the core parts of what makes the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons system work, and just how radically different can you play the game without actually breaking it? There is something of a fundamental design flaw in the game at the moment. It's not a big one. It's one of the reasons why I play a pretty loose game around the subject of monster or encounter challenge ratings. It's okay to use it as a rough guide to how dangerous an encounter is for player characters, but it's actually quite useless when it comes to fine-tuning your adventure design when it comes to using up the character's resources. See, 5th edition's challenge rating system is built around a couple of assumptions about how the game is played. The assumptions are that 5 people with player characters who are of the same experience level will engage in a certain number of encounters per day that all add up to a certain difficulty without taking long rest breaks in between, without having lots of magical or class-based means to fully recover, and therefore having fewer and fewer resources over the course of an adventuring day. And after a few days of this intense adventuring activity, basically having to retreat back to the safety of civilization to fully rest, restock, and so on. This doesn't actually happen the vast majority of the time, so challenge ratings are never going to be something you will want to get too serious about, and this actually throws a lot of other gaming assumptions into question. What is a fair and balanced encounter? How does such a thing actually exist? Should the players go into the adventure with their own assumption that the Dungeons & Dragons world is fundamentally nerfed and controlled by the Dungeon Master to be fair and balanced and not too dangerous, unless the players really make terrible decisions and pretty much try to get the characters killed? So first up, what is the core of 5th edition really based on, if not the challenge ratings of an encounter? This is fundamentally your character's attribute scores, their proficiency bonus, and their equipment, particularly magical equipment. If you mess with any of those aspects of the game, you're going to radically shift the way the game is played, and I'm sure I've got a few learned friends who will tell me that the class abilities that you have from a character class can also fundamentally shift and mess up your game. This is one reason why you, as Dungeon Master, should get seriously miserly when it comes to handing out magical items. I've got some suggestions about this, particularly any that give a bonus to attributes, not just the attack rolls. That's easy enough to handle. In 5th edition, it's much more likely that monsters are not going to totally avoid getting hit and damaged. The odds are certainly in the player character's favour when it comes to that, and I'll talk about that as well. To illustrate this, let's say your character is at a tavern and is being challenged to a game of axe throwing by a local champion in order to get a free round of drinks from the loser, but also to get some important information the adventurers need to avoid additional dangers on the road towards their goals. How big is this tavern? It's not going to be huge. What's the range on a hand axe? How hard is it to hit a target? Is it better to roll these attacks or to make it a dexterity challenge? Well, dexterity and strength checks are not actually for throwing things, so it comes down to this being an out-of-combat roll. You might expect the tavern axe throwing champion to be well above average when it comes to skill at throwing a simple hand axe, but as a non-adventuring non-player character, they usually won't have a 2-hit bonus higher than +5. The target at close range, but small, with a smoky tavern and lots of distractions from the crowd, has an armor class of 15. And it should really be lower, but it's technically a wooden object, so the tavern champion has a 50-50 chance of hitting the thing on a roll of a natural 20-sided die. Now, up steps Jothro, the level 2 Wood Elf Ranger, with a very modest dexterity score of 14. He routinely fights with either a longbow or a dagger in a hand axe combination, and he also has a +5 to hit that target. So your average level 2 adventurer is already on a level footing with the renowned champion axe thrower of this tavern, probably the entire town, and this is without spells, magic items, feats, special character class training, inspiration points, boons, and so on. At best, the real world has a 50-50 chance against an adventurer on their best day, and it would be a bad day for the adventurer. So, where is your game balance now? That's what I'm asking. The world itself is not balanced. Your character has already got advantages. Another game system that has been around almost as long as Dungeons & Dragons is Traveller, a hard science fiction game mostly well known because your character can actually die during character creation, due to the character's career and training, life experiences and connections being incorporated into their build. And life sometimes hands out lemons, sometimes it also hands out hand grenades. In Traveller, the characters don't have hit points. Wait, what? How do they handle combat damage without hit points? Well, objects and monsters have hit points, sure, but for player characters, the damage is removed from the character's attribute scores. Starting out with their endurance, which is basically the constitution score, it then starts to reduce either strength and dexterity scores. If the endurance of another of those scores is at 0, so 2 out of those 3, the character is knocked out. If all 3 are at 0, the character is dead. Of course, this results in the player having to make the choice to whittle down strength and dexterity, trying to avoid getting knocked out or dead, and of course, since their attributes are vital to combat ability, and these are getting reduced, it's harder and harder to remain effective in combat at all. So, Traveller players get really intimate with the rules for cover, and go to somewhat extreme lengths to get the drop on their enemies and do their damage, and as much of it as they can, before the enemy gets to hit back. The fact that Dungeons & Dragons players are not playing like that all the time, again, prompts me to ask, where is your game balance now? Combat should be scary. If you adopted that system for handling combat damage, most D&D players would say you're not playing D&D anymore. I say no. Now you're really playing it, you absolute chads. But also, I did mention not to mess with the attribute scores or you will break the game, so probably not a viable way to play the game where attribute score loss is so damned hard to deal with in 5th edition. It's certainly realistic to be a broken mess after getting shot and bashed a few times, but D&D is not about avoiding danger, it's about charging into it like a fool. I mean, like a hero. I would recommend adopting something from 4th edition though, where reaching half remaining hit points triggers something in the monsters or activates access to certain desperate power moves from the player characters. We call this bloodied. You could also set a level of 1/4 or lower of the hit points remaining, triggering additional vulnerabilities in monsters and also prompting them to use desperate means to escape. I've got another word for that condition, which is it's an adult word. There would be that one giant lizard that drops its tail or squirts a fountain of blood out of its eyes, or something that beats a very fast retreat, or that vampire turns to mist, or the goblin boss sacrifices his own tribe of minions in order to save his own hide. It could also be where a wizard can gain an extra spell slot in order to only cast some sort of combat-ending spell, but they do have to take some attribute damage in order to do so, such as reducing their hit point maximum until they can return to civilization and get extended rest and some sort of special arcane healing from another skilled spellcaster of their order. So if you're going to alter the strengths, weaknesses and special abilities of the opposition, you should also think about how it can be an aspect of what the player characters can do and vice versa. That, my friends, is what I call game balance. Let's take a look at another game system. This one is close cousined to Dungeons & Dragons. It's called Fantasy Age. Age stands for, or AGE stands for Adventure Game Engine, and it's the brainchild of Green Ronin Publishing's Chris Pramas. In this system, there are more options when it comes to major and minor actions during combat rounds, and the dice rolls are radically different to traditional D&D because Fantasy Age only uses 6-sided dice. When a player rolls doubles on those dice, they provide what is called stunt points. The player can spend these stunt points to pick up from a provided list of feat-like special moves, which are a lot of fun. And there are non-combat stunts as well for exploration and role-playing situations, not just combat and spellcasting. There's no reason why this could not be included in your 5th edition D&D gameplay. Instead of double rolls on 2 6-sided dice, which works out to be a probability of 16.7%, avoiding all the math, let's just say a natural unmodified roll of 18, 19 or 20 could provide stunt points a player can spend that round to do something cool, with bonus points for the high numbers in combination with advantage on that dice rolls. And it wouldn't be a matter of what the result of the second D20 is, because that doesn't really matter. So for example, an 18 could provide 1 stunt point, a 19 could provide 2, and 20 could provide 3. But if you're rolling those with advantage, you automatically add an extra one. So 18 provides 2, 19 provides 3, and get of a bonus, a natural 20 with advantage provides 5 stunt points. So a few examples of combat stunts. For 2 points, the attack could knock an opponent prone. For 3 points, they could set up an opening for an ally to exploit, giving them +2 on the next roll of choice that turn. And for 5 points, the attack adds 2d6 initial damage on what is probably already a critical hit. Exploration stunts include re-rolls of perception checks and hefty initiative bonuses if the exploration leads directly into a combat situation. Role-playing stunts involve swaying crowds, Captain Kirk levels of seduction, and use of stunningly witty remarks. I spent a period of several months playing Fantasy Age when I was a bit burned out with D&D instead of regular Wizards of the Coast D&D, and thoroughly enjoyed it, mainly for the stunt aspect, and I think it would add a lot of fun to refresh your enthusiasm for 5th edition D&D. This also doesn't mess with dice rolls, attribute scores, and magical equipment, and it is something that monsters and non-player characters can have access to as well. So you can make up secret stunt tables just for your use as the Dungeon Master if you like, and again, keeping potential boons balanced by giving equal footing for the opposition to the player characters as well as giving the player characters access to these stunts. So, balance. How about we look at the player characters another way, as an actual monster? This creature, the group of heroes, is a group of 3 to 5 individuals. They're actually operating far more like one entity, able to communicate somehow via the far realm known as the table, and can instantly coordinate their most devastating combinations of strikes, even if only one member of the group is able to see any part of the combat area that should otherwise be obscured or concealed from the rest. Plus, they can routinely regenerate hit points and restore abilities in dramatic boosts, even in the thick of combat, without reducing the brunt of their extreme violence output at all. Through mystical means, this creature is able to function in almost every environment in the multiverse, can speak every language, overcome any advantage their opponent possesses, and is one of the most stealthy monsters known to gods or men, mainly because no matter how much noise it makes, it is never heard any further away than its immediate encounter area by any other potentially dangerous creatures also in the wider area. Player character groups are, if you look at them like that, where a threat is meant to be encountered by players, absolutely gnarly. You would not put a group of equal player characters up against another group of player characters because it's just a nightmare. It's no wonder the gods watch every move of the player adventurers so closely, and the ruling elite of any particular civilization is very wise to keep a very close tab on whatever those adventurers are up to. Letting player characters just wander into your city is about as stupid and risky as opening the gates and laying out the welcome mat for a red dragon. I have a habit of any Dragonborn characters I play owning and being very protective, somewhat obsessive, over a sleeping roll made of precious metals and gems they've made out of fine chain, adding a large portion of their personal wealth to making it more and more valuable and spectacular, simply because sleeping on anything else is just horribly uncomfortable for them, and their hoard blanket is something other Dragonborn will see as a sign of their social status. It's the little cultural touches that really make player characters fun. Plus, if anyone or anything stole my character's sleeping roll, well, that's an instant adventure hook right there. So I just basically hand that to the Dungeon Master and say, look, threaten this and my character will do anything. So anyway, if you want to keep your game manageable and not shoot yourself right in the foot from the outset, move away from the mindset that the player characters must have magic items, that the game requires them to have at least this many items of this type by that level. It doesn't. That was never actually the case, though you can make a strong argument that it was standard practice for that to be the case, particularly in 4th edition. But no, you will find at the end of the day that the problem of power creep, in which this is a term meaning that the slow but inexorable increase in powers and abilities in a game system that start to disrupt it functioning correctly. So every time they come out with a new supplement, it gets more powerful and more powerful. So the original version of the character class or monsters start to be poor options compared to the new character classes and monsters and items. The actual problem of power creep in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons is not from the game. It's from what you are handing out to your player characters without also handing out similar resources and ability increases to the monsters and other encounters at the same rate and to the same degree. The game balance doesn't psychically know what you are doing and adjust itself. So if you're wondering why you are struggling to provide any sort of challenge to player characters as the campaign goes on and gets higher level, and they get more and more loot and more abilities, you first have to take a serious stock of what magic items, spells and other resources these characters have, and how they are free to take rest stops and find healing potions and get access to spell components and trade magic items and all these other things that they just take for granted. And ask yourself, did I actually read the rulebook and understand it, or did I just skim over the bits I needed to run combat and stuff and just absorb the rest of how I think D&D 5th edition should be played by other sources, many of whom come from older editions of the game and are themselves preloaded with false assumptions and unreasonable expectations of a game system which is actually, and has always been, perfectly well balanced. The problem, my friends, is that we are not actually prepared for a D&D edition that is actually fixed and actually balanced. So what do we try and do to steer the game play in the right direction, in a way that makes the game playable and fun, and not just like you're imprisoning magical items and making them very hard for characters to get? Well, first and foremost, get rid of magic shops, or at the very least make them extremely unreliable. In the Forgotten Realms campaign setting, there are some serious factions and background politics going on among the various groups and nations that have a lot of spellcasters. It's always been that way. It's one of the driving forces of the conflict and drama in the Forgotten Realms. There are places such as Aglarond where if the wrong sort of person is seen casting spells in public, they can get arrested and seriously messed up. The most ready source for fencing your magic items in most places in the realms might be a red wizard of Fae, who's going to give you well under the listed price of the Dungeon Master's Guide. And why the hell did you think that the prices of magic items would have any sort of commonly agreed on price in the first place? I bet you don't even vary the types of currency used across the continent of Faerun at all. Has your player character ever seen a trade bar? Okay, so what about fake magic items? If I'm a shifty wizard who can make the same amount of money selling a magic item that looks and detects just like the real deal, why the hell would I not knock off a bunch of fakes and sell them to some idiot adventurers who are mostly a pain in my ass anyway? Here you go, thanks for the few thousand gold. Good luck with that wand of fireballs. Did it seem like it had 20 charges? Oh sorry, it actually only had 2, and each additional fireball will cost the user 1 level of exhaustion and reduce their maximum hit points by 10. Let the buyer beware. Look at how magic items actually are. They're not mass-produced. They are made by individuals who largely have to guess at how other wizards make the same sort of items. It's a serious investment of their resources and time. They are expensive. They take a lot of pride in them. Why would they want to mass-produce these and sell them? It's not like they're making pottery. So you can expect magic items to look different from each other. So you may be able to identify who the maker of the item is based on materials and style. Wizards and the famous makers of samurai swords probably have a lot in common. So if you happen to have a +1 longsword of Frost made by Ritalin the Focused, mage and artificer of the Keep of Watches of Arn, who is trained by none other than Atnon of Helrua, metallurgist in the ancient Netherese tradition, that same sword is going to be 100% reliable and 5 times as expensive, because any expert who knows the trade will recognise that pedigree and be happy to trade for it. A +1 longsword made by Bandrum Mugglehump of Miss Morton's finishing school of the arcane arts, located in the back rooms of her boarding house and cat breeding business, may not fetch even half the price listed in the DMG, even if the sword actually does work. And what if it works fine for a while, but it's not actually as durable as magic weapons are supposed to be, and the thing is prone to rusting due to frost buildup, and sometimes it gets frozen inside the scabbard. A magic item doesn't have to be cursed, it can also be just a right pain in the ass and fairly unreliable, but it still works. Anyone who has owned a car or appliance for more than a few years will tell you it's all about its special little quirks. They will swear it's not broken, you just have to know how to use it right. I suggest to you, you are denying yourself a lot of fun in your games if you just treat every magic item as a stock standard product without any history, quirks, or flaws. And handing magic items over to characters simply because they have enough money and they walk into a shop that, for some reason that flies in the face of all logic and reason, there is just about every magic item in the book lining the shelves of this business. How fast do you think a dragon would tear the ass out of that city, town or village to get its talons on even a fraction of the magic items the characters simply dump on magic traders after looting the last lair, tomb or dungeon they ransacked? You can bet your ass that dragon is spending a lot of time keeping a very close eye on what a band of adventurers is doing in their territory and nearby territory. You see, dragons don't work for their hordes. they kill for them. Imagine a spell created by a dragon wizard that does nothing other than teleport any gold or non-secured by magical containment valuables on those characters. Your player characters are wandering through a ruin the dragon has spent years sending fake maps and rumours far and wide about, and suddenly, abracascam, any precious non-magical metal not carried in a magical bag of holding or similar just vanishes off their bodies, teleported to an unknown very well concealed location. The whole ruin has several of these sorts of arcane thievery traps installed. Imagine the characters frantically trying to divine exactly where all of their money just vanished to. When the dragon glides overhead, drops a disenchanter at a rust monster on them, and sweeps by onto safety, laughing its pointy tail off. You see, dragons are intelligent. It's their most lethal weapon. Alrighty. Plenty of food for thought and debate there. I'll leave you to ponder and comment down below. As always, I certainly make full use of the comment section to have conversations and share ideas. Please respect each other as much as I respect you. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more for you very soon.